Welcome, travelers, to Terrors in the Wild, where the line between myth and reality blurs in the darkest corners of the earth. Here, we unravel the most terrifying cryptids, dive deep into chilling horror stories, and explore the mysteries that haunt the wilderness. From shape-shifting monsters to forgotten legends, we uncover the creatures and tales that lurk just beyond the reach of human understanding. So, keep your wits sharp, hit that subscribe button, and prepare for a journey into the unknown. The wild is waiting, but beware. It's not just the animals you should fear.
Ranger Ethan Cross had been dreaming of this assignment since he first donned the forest green uniform. Yellowstone National Park, with its sprawling valleys, bubbling geysers, and majestic wildlife, was the crown jewel of the National Park Service. It was a place of wonder where nature ruled supreme. But as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows over the pines, Ethan couldn't shake the unease that had gripped him ever since he arrived. The warnings began on his first day. "Be careful around the backwoods," advised Ranger Lila, an older woman with a face weathered by years of exposure to the elements. Her eyes darted to the darkening tree line as she spoke. "There are stories about things out there." "What kind of things?" Ethan asked, laughing nervously. Her response was a cold, humorless stare. "Just stay near the main trails." Ethan didn't press further, dismissing her cryptic warning as the ramblings of someone who had spent too much time alone in the wilderness. But the words lingered in his mind as he drove his jeep deeper into the forest, toward his assigned station at Tower Junction. The station was isolated, miles from the nearest ranger outpost. It was a simple cabin, equipped with the bare necessities: a radio, a bunk, and a small wood stove. Ethan's first night passed uneventfully, though the eerie silence of the forest pressed in on him. By the second night, the silence was broken. Ethan was jolted awake by the sound of something heavy scraping against the walls of the cabin. He grabbed his flashlight and peered out the window, but the beam revealed nothing but a swaying canopy of pine trees. The sound came again, this time from the roof. Heart pounding, he stepped outside, the cold air biting through his jacket. His flashlight's beam caught movement near the tree line, a figure, hunched and shadowy, slipping between the trunks. "Hey!" Ethan called, his voice echoing into the stillness. The figure paused, just for a moment, before vanishing into the darkness. The next morning, Ethan shared the encounter with Lila over the radio. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice tense. "Saw what?" "The Skinwalker," she replied grimly. "People have been seeing them for centuries out here. They're not just stories, they're real." Ethan laughed nervously. "Come on, Lila, that's just folklore." "Folklore doesn't leave tracks," she snapped. "Check the ground around your cabin." Ethan did as she suggested and found them, large, misshapen prints that seemed almost human, but too elongated, as if the creature had been running on all fours. A few days later, a hiker was reported missing near Lamar Valley. Ethan and a search party scoured the area, calling the man's name into the wilderness. They found his campsite easily enough. A tent shredded, belongings scattered, but no sign of the man himself. What they did find were more tracks. "You think a bear did this?" asked one of the volunteers, his voice trembling. "Bears don't leave prints like these," Ethan replied, his unease growing. That night, Ethan awoke to whispers outside his cabin. They were faint, like a distant conversation carried on the wind. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, scanning the darkness. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl. A pair of glowing eyes stared at him from the tree line, too high off the ground to belong to any wolf. He fired a warning shot, and the creature retreated, its movement unnaturally fluid. Ethan began keeping a journal, documenting the strange occurrences. The whispers grew louder each night, accompanied by scratching at the windows and doors. The missing hiker was never found, but more campers reported hearing strange noises at night. Some claimed to see a figure stalking the woods, its form shifting between human and animal. Ethan's fellow rangers started avoiding Tower Junction, citing vague excuses. Even Lila grew distant, her radio messages short and clipped. Desperate for answers, Ethan delved into the park's history. He learned of an old Shoshone legend about creatures that could mimic voices and appearances, luring victims into the wilderness. These creatures, known as Skinwalkers, were said to be witches who had committed unspeakable acts to gain their powers. One night, Ethan followed the whispers, armed with his rifle and flashlight. They led him deep into the forest, to a clearing lit by the eerie glow of the moon. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of stones, each marked with strange symbols. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him, though no one was in sight. The whispers grew deafening as Ethan stood frozen in the clearing. They weren't just sounds. They were voices. Voices he recognized. His late mother, calling his name like she had when he was a child. His sister's laughter. Even Lila, her tone desperate and pleading. "Ethan, help me. I'm here." But Ethan knew better now. Whatever this thing was, it thrived on trickery, on the echoes of the familiar. The creature emerged fully into the clearing, its twisted form illuminated by the pale moonlight. Its shape defied logic, a mockery of humanity and animal. Its limbs were long and sinewy, its fingers ending in jagged claws. The face was the worst of all, a grotesque mask that flickered between a human man's face and the snarling visage of a wolf. "You don't belong here," it hissed, its voice layered with tones, human and inhuman, soft and guttural. Ethan raised his rifle, steadying his aim. "Stay back." The creature laughed, a horrible, raspy sound. "Bullets won't save you, Ranger. You're in my domain now." It lunged. Ethan fired, the deafening crack of the rifle echoing through the forest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it straightened, a twisted grin spreading across its face as it reached into its chest and pulled out the mangled bullet. Ethan cursed under his breath and backed away, his eyes darting to the stones around him. The strange markings on them seemed to pulse faintly, reacting to the creature's proximity. The creature lunged again, faster this time. It swiped at Ethan with its claws, tearing through his jacket and leaving a searing pain across his chest. He stumbled and fell, landing hard against one of the stones. The moment his hand touched the carved symbols, the creature recoiled with a shriek. It thrashed violently, its form flickering like a poorly tuned TV. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, clutching at the stone as if it were a lifeline. The symbols glowed brighter now, their energy pulsing up his arm. Desperation overtook him. He racked his brain, remembering the research he had done on Shoshone legends. He had written down a prayer, an invocation meant to banish evil spirits. He hadn't believed it at the time, but now he had no choice. Clutching the stone, he began to recite the words, his voice shaky but growing stronger with each syllable. "Away with you, spirit of darkness. You are not welcome in this place of light. Return to the shadows from which you came." The creature screamed, its voice splitting into 1,000 wails. Its form convulsed, its limbs elongating and contracting as if it couldn't decide what to be. Ethan repeated the prayer, louder this time. The stones around the clearing began to glow in unison, forming a circle of light. The creature charged at him, but the moment it crossed the glowing boundary, its body was flung back with a force that shook the ground. It howled in rage, clawing at the air, but the light from the stones grew blinding, enveloping the clearing. With one final guttural scream, the creature collapsed in on itself, its form imploding into a cloud of black smoke that was sucked into the earth. The forest went silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a weight had been removed. Ethan sat there for a long time, clutching the glowing stone and gasping for breath. The clearing, once alive with unholy energy, now felt strangely peaceful. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden rays through the trees. The symbols on the stones faded, their glow extinguished. Ethan remained in the clearing as the morning sun climbed higher, its warmth thawing the frost on the grass. His body ached. His chest burned where the creature's claws had raked him, and his hands trembled as he stared at the now dormant stones. Whatever power had coursed through them was gone, leaving behind only faint etchings and cold, lifeless rock. He staggered to his feet, gripping his side where the creature had thrown him. Blood seeped through the tears in his jacket, but it wasn't life-threatening, at least not yet. He retrieved his rifle from where it had fallen, its metal still warm from the frantic shots he had fired. The clearing was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of wind through the pines, just an oppressive stillness, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The air felt lighter, but the weight of what had happened pressed on Ethan's shoulders. He glanced back at the stones one last time. What the hell was that? He muttered to himself. The walk back to his cabin was a blur. Every rustle of leaves or crack of a twig set his heart racing, his finger twitching on the rifle's trigger. But no shadows darted through the trees. No glowing eyes watched him from the dark. The whispers were gone. When he reached the cabin, Ethan slammed the door shut and bolted it, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. He collapsed onto his bunk, clutching his head. His thoughts spiraled. What had he seen? The creature's form, its shifting face, the guttural growls that had echoed from its throat. They defied logic, defied everything he believed about the natural world. He reached for the radio and called Lila. "Lila, it's Ethan. You there?" His voice cracked, betraying his exhaustion. There was a pause, then static crackled before her voice came through. "Ethan? You sound awful. What happened?" I saw it," he stammered. "The thing you warned me about. The Skinwalker." The line went silent for a moment. When Lila spoke again, her voice was grim. "I told you to stay near the trails." "I didn't have a choice," Ethan said. It came for me. I followed it to some kind of clearing with these stones. I think I stopped it, but..." He trailed off, unsure of how to explain what he had witnessed. "You're lucky you made it back alive," Lila said. Her tone softened, but there was no comfort in her words. "You need to leave, Ethan. That thing, it doesn't just disappear. Even if you forced it back, it'll come for you again. They don't like to lose." Her warning sent a chill down his spine. Ethan spent the rest of the day patching himself up and gathering his things. He cleaned the claw marks across his chest, though the wounds felt deeper than they appeared, a lingering burning sensation radiating from the scratches. As the sun began to set, he ventured outside to inspect the area around the cabin. What he found chilled him to the core. Large clawed prints circled the cabin, overlapping with the tracks he had seen earlier. They were deeper now, as if the creature had pressed its weight into the ground in frustration. Nearby trees bore fresh gashes, bark stripped clean in long, angry swipes. On the cabin's door, someone, or something, had scratched a single word: "Leave." The letters were jagged, uneven, and carved deep into the wood. By nightfall, Ethan had packed everything he could fit into his Jeep. He didn't bother filing a formal transfer request or waiting for approval. He knew Lila was right. He couldn't stay. As he loaded the last of his gear, he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. He froze, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. But when he turned, there was nothing there. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The drive out of the park was agonizing. The narrow forest roads seemed to stretch on forever, the towering pines pressing in from all sides. Every shadow looked like a predator, every flicker of movement a potential threat. When he finally reached the main ranger station, he handed in his keys and told the supervisor he was resigning. No explanation, no notice, just a firm, "I can't stay here." The supervisor didn't press him for details. Ethan left Yellowstone, but the memories stayed with him. Back home, in the safety of his small apartment, he tried to return to normal life. But the wounds on his chest didn't heal properly, leaving thin, silvery scars that ached whenever the air grew cold. Some nights, he swore he could still hear the whispers, faint and distant, like a voice carried on the wind. He would wake drenched in sweat, the image of the creature's burning eyes seared into his mind. He avoided forests entirely, even parks, in the middle of the city. Months later, Ethan received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, bearing only 2 words: "Stay away." Ethan stared at the note for a long time, his hands shaking. He didn't know if it was a warning or a threat, but he wasn't about to test his luck. Even now, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Skinwalker was out there, watching, waiting. And though he had escaped its domain, he knew he would never truly be free of it.
As this story ends, remember, out here in the wild, the terrors never truly vanish. They're always watching, waiting. If you dare to face them again, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know when the next nightmare will find you. Until then, stay safe or stay scared.